All right. Good evening, everyone. So if you want to start the meeting, if you want to go ahead and start the meeting, we'll take roll call and then a couple of announcements.
Larry, turn on your microphone though.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we're calling the zoning board of adjustments meeting to order.
All right. So behind the agenda, it's got the roster. I'll go ahead and call the roll call. Board member Weinstock.
Here.
Board member Hanson.
Here.
Board member Waldman.
Here.
Board member Cicero.
Here.
And board member Gerstein.
Present.
Okay. Mr. Hartman, who's one of our alternate board members, had a presentation going on today, so he couldn't make, and he's having problems with Thursdays right now. And then Mr. Zobel had a project due, so he called this morning saying he wasn't going to be able to make it. I didn't hear from Mr. Luna as of yet. He was supposed to be in there, but we got a couple of new board members. Ms. Hanson, introduce you to the board. Mr. Weinstock's been here for several years. It's Mr. Cicero, Mr. Gerstein for a couple of years, and then Ms. Waldman is one of our new members, but knows the process and there. And then our council liaison is Ms. Council Member Pishan Hellman, and there who represents or reports back to the council on the board activities. Then I'm Carlos Trejo, the planning director for the city of Olivet. Got my staff, Don Doty, she's our senior planner, and Jack Carswell is our planning and zoning administrator, and then Ms. Stephanie Carr, who is our city attorney. So Chairman, I'm gonna share a presentation. I actually found this something that Paul had put together for us a couple of years. So
This is being recorded or we don't?
it is on the recording, yes. So I'm just going to kind of give a quick overview of the board role and procedures, and then the goal is to have a conversation with Ms. Carr about variances and all that, or ask questions regarding that process. And there, once you kind of get a brief overview, if there's any comments, I know a couple of members are new. I mean, please chime in, and if there's something you want to meet. One of the things I'll note that the way we've always set it up is the second Thursday of the month has been reserved for zoning board of adjustment meetings. We only meet on a request basis. So unless I get an application, will I set a meeting? And we've gotten 1 year that we only had one request, and we've gotten 1 year where we met just about every month in there. So it varies. It's been slow in there, which is good, which means people are following the rules and regulations and the ordinances, and things are working like they should be. If we're meeting a lot, that means, especially on the same thing, means that there's an issue that needs to be reviewed or discussed and all that. In order to have a meeting, somebody has to submit an application or a request, and it gets reviewed and it has to get denied. You can't just say, I'm going to go to the board. You have to apply for something, have it reviewed by staff, and then they make a determination of something being denied, and then they have the option. We'll give them things to consider. Here, do it this way, look at it this way, and the last case scenario, you could apply for an appeal, and there is no, it may or may not happen. We don't know, but we're there. Our staff is there to represent the city and its ordinances, and we make them aware of that. Then they apply. If they do apply for the variance, I have to post it in a paper of record that's recognized by the city, usually called the county in St. Louis, or in there. And in order to meet their deadline, I need to submit like what we call posting a week in advance. And so I have to work backwards. I have to look at, well, when's the next second Thursday of the month? And usually I need about 30 days. One is to send out an email saying, hey, it looks like we're going to have somebody apply. Two, draft what we call the posting and get that to the paper. And then the paper has to publish it 15 days prior to the meeting. So it is very difficult to, well, first is the 15 days of notice that has to be provided. And then from there, the deadline to get it into the newspapers a week prior. So I'm already 3 weeks out. And then for us to review what they submit and get that, it's usually going to be about 30 days. So people can't just come in and say, well, I want to go to the board. If there's, and tomorrow is the second Thursday of the month, so why can't I go? Well, there's a whole process in there, and we have to provide that notice in the paper. We also have to notify property owners within 300 feet, and that's to give them time they have their own schedules and things going on, to give them adequate time to determine if they want to attend or not. So just a little heads up on that in there. So I'm going to go through a presentation that was prepared a couple of years back that just kind of goes over what is the Board of Adjustment, how do we get there, what do you guys do, what do you review, and then other just general things you need to be aware of. So typically you hear appeals and variances. Now the board is established by state statute. So just about every community in the state of Missouri has a Board of Adjustment. If you have a zoning code, it means you're going to have a Board of Adjustment, and they're there to hear when there are issues in the application of the code. Could be different types of things, but there has to be a process to be able to review these type of things, or when there's conflicts with the code, whether it's something on how I interpret, how somebody applies it to a project, or some other things that we'll go over in there. So what the city of Olivet did is we adopted what we call Article Roman numeral 17, which is part of our zoning code that establishes the Olivet Zoning Board of Appeals. There are 5 permanent members, or I'm going to use the term permanent members, and this is how the state statutes is written. You have to have 5 permanent members and 3 alternate members. And because we don't meet routinely, I usually do need the 3, because it's hard to get 5 people to show at a given notice, even if it's a month in advance. They all have to be residents, and the code doesn't say that you have to have specific backgrounds or specialties. We usually like people with a legal background, people that have some construction knowledge, but it's also good to have general residents in that process. And what you kind of serve as is what we call a quasi judicial body. So you're kind of like a court. I call it more like a jury. You'll hear a staff presentation, you'll hear an applicant's presentation, you'll hear public comments, and then amongst yourselves, you'll talk about it and then make a recommendation. Recommendations are always going to be like if you're going to grant what the request is, and then you'll vote. And I'll talk about how that vote process works in a second, because it is different. It's not just a simple majority. Because you are making an exception to the code, it requires like a super majority in there. I have to have the 5 members, or only 5 voting members during one appeal. So even if I had all 8 of you here, it's going to be the 5 primary members that serve first, and then after that, counting the alternates. Okay. Procedures. All our meetings are open to the public. We do record them all. Anytime somebody speaks before you as a board, again, you're kind of a court or a jury, that individual has to be sworn in. They're giving public testimony that is recorded and can be used in a court of law, I guess, to describe it, if there was ever an appeal of an appeal in there. And I'll go over that later on. We keep minutes for each of the meetings, and those minutes have to reflect what motions were made, who made those motions, and what the vote was. And then we add additional comments and discussions in those minutes. And in cases there was ever an appeal of an appeal, we have to produce a transcript. So we actually, if when need be, we'll make a request to get like a whole book of transcribed discussions. This is beyond meeting minutes that would be made available for a circuit court. People that present to you as a board, whether it's staff or individual applicants, or even somebody from the public, if they submit something, they should submit it as an exhibit. And that, in essence, makes it as part of it formally makes it part of the discussions. And if there was ever an appeal to an appeal, in a court, the judge is going to look at the exhibits that were submitted. They're not going to look at something, well, I noted this, well, I provided this, but if I didn't provide this as an exhibit or note it as an exhibit, it doesn't exist. It was, in there. So everything we kind of say, your applications, we make sure like all our reports are submitted as exhibits, And then we make sure on behalf of the applicant, because they may or may not be attorneys, they can have attorneys represent them, but that their application is submitted as an exhibit, their plans are submitted as an exhibit. And if they provide anything else, we also make sure that it's noted as an exhibit, so they have all their information in place. And those ultimately are the documents that a court would use to review an appeal of an appeal.
Can I just add one thing with respect to that? So one of the most important exhibits that you're going to have is going to be presented by the city or by the city staff, and that is the Code of Ordinances for Olivet. And you're probably thinking, well, all of our variance appeals or all of our administrative appeals come to us because of some interpretation of the code or because of some requirement of the code. But if this were to go up on appeal, it goes down to the circuit court down in Clayton. And the law is that a judge cannot take what they call judicial notice of the Code of Ordinances for any city. And so they have to be in the record. Just like a judge down in Clayton, he can say, I'm going to take judicial notice of the statute, which means that he can consider any of the statutes of the state of Missouri without them actually being into evidence. But the law doesn't allow the judge to do that for any ordinances of a city. So any ordinance that you're going to have or that you're going to consider or that dictate, let's say, the setbacks on a variance request, they have to be put into the record so that the judge can consider them. If the ordinances are not an exhibit, that means that the judge does not have any setback requirements that he has to go by. So the whole case would be tossed and then put back into your lap to properly then consider all the exhibits.
All right. Any questions on that process or so? And there, all right. So what does the board oversee? And this is what we call your jurisdiction. So these are things that the board has by code, the ability to make decisions. An alleged error. So if somebody disagreed with one of my staff members, whether it was on a building issue, on a zoning issue, or on an interpretation, we can come before the board. They can petition to go before the board, and you would hear, what our interpretation is as a city, and then the interpretation by the staff. It was okay. You want to go check? Yeah. And there, so somebody, again, if they disagreed with the staff interpretation regarding, let's say it was a laundry facility, and they're saying, well, no, the code says dry cleaner. We're coin-operated laundry, so we're not a dry cleaner. Well, dry cleaner is the closest thing I have. It's like, well, I disagree, and they wanted to challenge that decision. They can do so before the board. Hello, Mr. Luna. All right. And this is Ronaldo Luna. He's our regular board member. So, all right. So again, so the board has jurisdiction if there's a challenge or an interpretation or an error. The other thing that the board does is interpret to like when the zoning map isn't clear. So if we didn't know where specifically a boundary or what a specific parcel and what boundary it should be, we could petition to go to the board to get that clarified. The other one rarely seen is a public service commission or utility building. So if they were there's an existing home and Ameren wanted to use it for whatever purposes, the board has jurisdiction over allowing that type of use in a residential district in there. The other important one that we see every once in a while is reconstruction. So if a building that is too close to the street catches on fire, and it's not totally, before we could issue a permit for repair because it was too close to the street, they could petition to the board to get waivers on if it doesn't comply on its placement or location in there. And then the one that you probably see 98% of the time are what we call variances, and that's where somebody can't comply with a code, especially a spatial component of the code. So they can't be, they don't have enough room to, or they need to be closer to the street or closer to a side yard or rear yard. That would be petitioned and come before the board. So again, you have errors where where somebody believes that staff has misinterpreted something, interpretations to the zoning map, Public Service Commission, reconstruction, and variances. Now, who can appeal to the board? Somebody has to get denied in something. It could be anyone in here. They're usually representing a resident or a resident. So they could do it on their behalf, but they got denied either because they feel like we didn't interpret something correctly. We denied a building permit or a plan review permit because of a setback issue or some use type of issue. It could be a neighborhood organization. It could be even staff that we disagreed with a determination of it'd be rare, like the Parks Department appealed a zoning code aspect of how we were applying the setback for a building. It's possible. So they can appeal, decisions by what we call the building official. That's kind of us. All appeals stays, all proceedings until review, meaning like if you were applying for a house and I denied you, everything kind of stops until you go through the appeal process. You're not under any specific deadline or condition as long as you're following through in the appeal process. So if you received a notice from us that said you have to demo your house in 5 days and you appealed that, then that puts it in pause as long as you're following the process until you get a decision before the board. That's kind of like an extreme type of example. Again, we have to set up a reasonable date and time for the appeal to be reviewed, and we have to provide public notice. And that's where I'm telling you, it takes about 30 days before a meeting is scheduled. And then the board may reverse or affirm or wholly or partly a decision. The board may modify a decision or a request, and the board can put requirements on a decision or a request in there. You have that authority in there. One of the things I always note to applicants when they apply and things that you see, the board's not an architectural review board. The board is not a zoning board to an extent in there. You're generally looking at specific criteria of the regulations and why they don't apply. You're not necessarily looking at the brick. You're not necessarily looking if it's a 1 or a 2-story home. You're not necessarily looking at, whether, the pool's the right size or not the right size in there. But sometimes you can't help it. You kind of do, but again, you're not there for the aesthetics of it in there. And so when petitioners do apply, we make sure like they have, you may be knowledgeable in all the codes and ordinances and see, well, where's your stormwater? Well, they're not applying or appealing the decision about the stormwater. It's just not shown because it's a question about where their driveway is placed at. So you'll just see the information pertinent to you, but we'll make sure you have enough information to make an assessment and not look at other, aspects of it. And there are some times where, oops, yeah, that probably was important and we mess up and we'll try to get that clarified or clear. We do take a look at those things. All right. So on about 98% of appeals or things that come before the board are about variances in there. So that means that somebody can't comply with the code or is looking to get some relief from the code for whatever reason. There are generally 2 types that we're going to talk about: area variances and use variances. Area variances are when it's like a dimensional aspect of the code again, and then use variances is like, I want to put something in this district that's not necessarily called out for in there. I've been here 22 years and I haven't seen a use variance before us yet. And they're very rare, but it's always possible that can happen. As a planner, I think there are other remedies before it could even be appealed that should be exhausted before something like that comes before here. Other things to understand as I talk about that, the board isn't here to write code. The code is already adopted and provided by the council. You're just here to determine when aspects of the code should warrant relief to a specific property in there, and we'll go over that in just a second. So again, 2 types of variances: area variances and use variances. So when you see a area variance, in order for it to be considered, is that there has to be something unique about the property. that applying the code standard would make it extremely difficult to do as opposed to an inconvenience, that the variance would not necessarily affect adjacent properties, that the variance would observe the spirit of the zoning ordinance, and the variance would satisfy these additional criteria that I'm going to go through in the next section. But of those five, it's the first two that are really important. The property owner or a neighbor is going to tell you about the effects of, like, if you approve this garage that's 2 feet from my property line, it's going to impact me, you know, in there. So that one's an easy to identify. But the first two are the ones that we prepare the petitioners or applicants to really focus on, you know, like what is so different about your property that everybody else in all of that has to comply, but you don't. You know, why does your property warrant some type of relief that we wouldn't apply to anybody else in there? And it could be because, you know, we do have properties that are unique in there. Sometimes they're old platted properties, sometimes they're newly created properties, but they're just like no other. And then there are what we call those practical difficulties that would just make it impossible to try to do something in there. Those first two are kind of the same. But the one thing I would emphasize is the way the code is written. Each of these 5 principles is and. So it has to be unique, and it has to be a practical difficulty, and it would not affect adjacent properties, and it would be compliant with the spirit of the code, and it will meet these other criteria. That other criteria is that it doesn't impair light and air on adjacent properties. It doesn't increase congestion in public streets. It doesn't increase the public danger or fire safety. It doesn't diminish or impair property value, and it doesn't impair public health, safety, comfort, morals, and welfare. But the key ones are always these two here, and really that's what you want to challenge the property owner of justifying what's the unique in there. The one thing that's always different is it's about property. It's not about the individual. It's not about the occupant. It's not about the character of the neighborhood or things. It's about what is unique about this specific property, its boundaries, topography, its natural aspects, and all that. Christina.
What is the zoning district? Is that all of Olivet, or do we have districts within Olivet?
We have multiple districts within all of that. So we'll have like 65% of all of that is zoned single family residential. Then we have commercial districts, we have industrial district, we have an industrial district, we have a parks district, and then we have some multifamily districts. So, and each of those have their own like list of uses that are called out. And again, it's rare that I haven't seen a use request for a variance, but all of them have area requirements that are called out. 40 feet back from the road, 10 feet from the neighbor, you know, from the side property, 10 feet from the rear property, or require a buffer. There's height requirements and all that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The zoning map is available. The zoning map is available on our website. And so you can access it anytime.
So. And then there are the use variances, somewhat similar in what is required, but I highlighted in red the differences, because again, it has to be a unique property. But if somebody wants to put a daycare in a single family district, you know, there has to be a unique condition about that property that a daycare can't be located anywhere else. 2, you know, they have to prove that nothing else could be done on that property, that in essence, that zoning that property single family made it completely useless in there. 2, they have to demonstrate that they really looked at other options or considered options beyond like just trying to do what they were coming for. And then the impact to the adjacent properties. And then it goes back to the same criteria about light and air, congestion, fire safety, property value, and then public health and safety.
So Carlos, could I ask a question here? And it really is just based upon the fact that we used to have an attorney on this board, Mr. Hickert, where I always heard, what is the hardship?
Mhm.
And I've heard tonight, practical difficulties and unique conditions. And here under the use variance is the first where, the word hardship is bringing my historical memory back. What is the difference between practical difficulties, unique conditions, and hardship?
Mhm. Good question.
So I do think that sometimes practical difficulties and hardship, I think that those terms are used interchangeably. So there are some times when people will come up and say my hardship is, when really they mean my practical difficulties, or they only have to satisfy the standard for practical difficulties. So because an area variance, it's not so intrusive, or it's not such a variation from the zoning district. It doesn't give rise to a lot of the adverse effects that maybe a use variance will. That standard for practical difficulties is a little lower than a hardship. So practical difficulties, it is, well, you know what, I really can't build over here because I've got this swale, or I've got a creek, or the topography is causing me some problems, or the shape of the lot is causing me some problems, and my house really needs to face the street. So those are just practical difficulties. A hardship, when you're talking about a use variance, that's going to be very intrusive, because what they're talking about is allowing a use on that parcel that doesn't fit in the zoning district. And so there's a lot more adverse effects. And so you've got to show, and what a hardship is that you're pretty much denied any beneficial use of the land without this use variance. So whatever it's zoned for, you really can't use it for anything else. And so practical difficulties for for an area variance, that's a little bit lower than what it takes your burden of proof for a hardship. But like I said, a lot of people use those terms interchangeably. It's just really the standard.
So when I look like in terms of and we do, again, I haven't seen a use variance, but I can't say that it's out of the question. But the first one is that the property has that unique condition. That's usually about the property, whether it's the boundaries of the property, the shape of the property, the topography of the property, the natural features of the property. It's something about the property, something you can physically see. When I think of the practical difficulties, I think of kind of like easements. MSD has an easement that runs right through the middle of the property that, there, that's, while it could be, unique condition of the property, but it's something that, if the city created a parcel that had an easement that ran right through the middle of it, we created a parcel that ultimately is going to have practical difficulties being developed in there. And that does happen in some of the old properties. We'll find these things. When we create new properties, we try to make sure that those issues don't happen. But those are the type of things that can warrant. The other things, I mean, and there are other things that can fall under that practical difficulties thing, and some flexibilities, and that's where, your backgrounds kind of play a role. But it could be that the existing house has such a unique roof format that trying to re-alter or change that roof could lead to other difficulties into the, improvement of the property. Not to say that it's warranted, but that's something somebody can use in there. So those are the two that the one you're really going to see more of these area variances than anything else. I also will note that we, in the component of interpretations, you're to interpret when somebody is contesting a decision based on the zoning code or sign code or subdivision code in there. There's another board called the Board of Building Appeals. So if somebody was challenging a condition to a building permit, there's another board that oversees that aspect of it. So you'll never get into the technicalities of insulation or, truss specifications or, yours are generally going to be more of, visual aspects of what they want to do, not how they're going to do it in there. So just be cognizant of that. We would never bring something like that before you. And not that we wouldn't want to, it's just we can't, you know, there's another group that does it. So conditions in granting a variance, the board may impose additional conditions. You don't necessarily have to give people the variance that they've requested. So if somebody asks for 10 feet, you could say 5 feet, you could say 1 foot, or you could say 0. And you can also put conditions in your in those requirements, but you got to be careful because again, it can't be tied to the individual. It can't be tied to, well, I don't know, in the use of operation, they could do like the hours of operation in there. But you can impose additional conditions in there that in part of providing the relief to a setback, that they also grant an easement in there to avoid any further, things. And a lot of the time staff will do any of the general work or provide you recommendations or things for the board to consider, because you don't necessarily have to agree with us all the time in there, that we will note those.
And remember that if you do want to impose some conditions on a variance, if you're going to grant a variance, but you want to condition, you want to place conditions on the variance, then those need to be designed to mitigate the adverse effects of the variance itself. So in the example that Carlos gave up here, yes, you can construct a garage closer to the side yard, the side property boundary than is allowed by the zoning district, but because you're going to have this kind of imposing face upon very close to the neighboring property, we want you to put in additional landscaping or something like that, so that, you know, the next door neighbor, while your garage is closer to that property line, the next door neighbor isn't just looking at this wall. There's something there to break it up or to soften it just a little bit. So just remember, when you are looking at placing a condition on a variance, it's got to relate somehow to mitigating those, you know, those adverse effects from the variance itself.
And then consider variances are an exception to the zoning choices made by the council. I mean, these are our rules and regulations that, identify the community's character, vision, and such. And they should be granted sparingly, because you're actually granting something that would be contrary to what the overall vision or goal is, or at least our codes are supposed to reflect. So again, if variances were granted here and there, there's really no need to have zoning in place. The other thing, while your decisions don't set precedent, you're reviewing items case by case. Everyone that comes in is going to do their homework, and they're going to point out, well, they got a larger pool and we're here for that larger pool too, or something like that. So you'll be surprised. So, when you make your decisions or have your discussions, our reports really try to narrow down the specific, conditions of a property, or why something was unique or so in there. But just keep that in mind. Larry, you had a question?
Well, we do set precedents. I mean, kind of.
I don't think that you're beholden to that precedent because every property is different.
They are, but yeah, I think it's something you got to take into consideration.
And then at that point, from a planning perspective, would be and then there's something wrong with the code. If it is something that, like, every triangular piece of property got a relief from a setback, and then, it behooves that we take a look at the code and look at these type of specific properties and make necessary changes in there. And we've done that before when I started.
Mm-hmm.
So
Happens if a house was built under the previous codes, it is a violation of current codes, and they want to add on to that existing building.
good
What
question.
codes apply?
So we would call the conditions of the property legal non-conforming, meaning that it was built in accordance with whatever rules and regulations
Right.
were in place. And we make that assumption right now that every property that's built pulled a permit and it complied with whatever the conditions were in place at that time. So all of a sudden we change the setbacks, and we do every once in a while in there. And now we actually, by the change in the setbacks, the property is now closer to the road than it was before. And the new owners purchase a property, they didn't look in there, you gotta be knowledgeable in the codes to figure out, oh, wow. You know, in there, so it does happen a lot, especially in older housing stock. And you want to put an addition, and you'll come in, talk to Jack, Don, or myself, in there, and we go over the setbacks, and we'll note, well, you know, 10 feet of the front of your house is over the property line. So when you consider your addition, here's the areas that you can add on to. So they could be a simple addition in the back of the house, to the side of the house, and all that. Those are the simple ones. You know, it's like, yeah, you can expand your kitchen, but you got to expand it this way. I can't let you go forward. And then the complex one is, okay, we bought this house, and now 10 feet of the house is, you know, too close to the road, and we want to add a second story. Now, we get into discussions with them. Okay, so if you set back the, you know, the edge of the second story behind the 10 feet, can you do that? Is it possible? Sometimes it's not given, and sometimes it you know, it could make the cost exponentially high too. But we talk to them about that. The other complications, like they may be able to do that, but to do that, they're going to have to put a new roof on the part that's over the 10 feet to make those adjustments. And sometimes those appeals have to come before the board, because we don't have the authority just to say, no, you can go ahead and change that, or don't worry about that in there. So there's a couple of things. Again, one, it's okay to have a non-conforming structure. You can continue to use it. You can go inside and gut it in there, but you can't move the shell. When you want to do an addition, again, as long as you don't touch the area that's not in compliance, you can go all the way up to the new line, but you can't get any closer. And then there are the situations where, you know, I want to widen that non-conforming area, or I want to go up in that non-conforming area. We'll talk to them about, did you consider other things? And in the worst case, they may consider saying, no, yes, we did, but we would like to pursue an appeal. It just makes the most financial or logical sense just to go upward in there. And that's where something would come before you, and you have that authority.
So when people come up to for needs a variance, and they come in front of the board, do you have an opinion on, given the facts, do you have an opinion on whether that should pass or not?
Yeah, we'll provide you a staff report to kind of note in there. And then we always go through these, you know, and typically what you'll see, you know, in every 10 appeals, 9 of those will have modifications from staff recommendations. Like, the only way it's going to work is you're going to have to do it this way and minimize this and all that. A lot of times you won't see what we originally saw. You'll see an adjusted version. Then, and you'll note, and sometimes you'll see that one that says, I don't care. I'm just going to do it. And, you know, we note it, you know, in our reports, and, you know, the final decision is yours. We're not here to challenge your decisions unless we think that there is a legitimate interest in doing so. But yeah, you'll see those every once in a while. And I think most of the time you'll pick it up.
Who is I don't care? The person that's,
The applicant.
okay,
Yeah.
not,
And
not
like I
the
said,
staff, it's the
out of
person,
every 10,
okay.
it's probably
okay.
just one that, hey, I, you know, yeah. Okay, now, in order for a variance to be approved or authorized or granted, again, there are always going to be, well, to have a quorum of the board, I need 4 people. And that is, in order for a variance to get approved, you have to have four yeses in there. The board is primarily made up of the 5 principal members. So a majority of the board is really 3. So I can have a meeting of the board with 3, but you can't take a vote on a variance unless there's a 4th person in there. And then in order to get a variance approved, you need 4 votes. So if only 4 members showed up, it would have to be a unanimous decision. So we always try to get that 5th person, because that gives that, you know, that resident that's petitioning before you, whether they're a developer or homeowner or whatever, that ability to, to lose 1 vote or not get 1 vote. And it does happen in there. And but what I can't have is like 7 members of the board, and then that gives them the 4, that gives them, the potential to get 4 out of 3 of the votes. So it's always only 5 members can vote. And of those 5 voting members, 4 of them have to concur or to grant the appeal. And again, I can have a meeting with only 4 people. So every time when we hold a meeting and I'm short a person, we inform the applicant and give them that opportunity. Do you want to defer and wait till next month? Or do you want to pursue and see, see if you can get everybody to agree? So they're always aware of that. Again, I have 3 alternates. I've been very fortunate in there, and now I think I have a full board with that. So it's rare, but it's always hard to, I wish I could tell you on the Thursday of February, we're going to have a meeting, because I can't. And it's odds are, I got to find out 30 days before, send you guys an email, hope everybody gets it promptly and responds. But sometimes you're out of town or you don't see it and all that. And then I'm trying to find out, can I do it before I put it in the paper and before I send out notices and, get everybody excited. We're trying to confirm, do I have enough people? And then when I get to that meeting, again, I need 5 of you, no more than 5 of you to vote. So if you're the 6th, 7th, or 8th person, you're like, well, the Blues game is on that night, and there are other things I could do. So it's always hard, and we do our best to work in there. And because we're not very consistent in terms of meeting, we recognize that happens in there. And sometimes I have, the 5 primary members. Sometimes I have a split between the primary and alternates, and sometimes I only can get 4. And sometimes we're sitting here at the dais, at the meeting, just waiting for one more person to show up, and that happens, and and we're all human in there. But in order for a variance to be authorized, it has to have 4 votes. So even
And I just want to elaborate on one thing that Carlos did say. So he said that, let's say that we only get 4 members for a particular meeting. And he said earlier that we inform the applicant of that. So what I usually suggest to boards of adjustment, there's no legal requirement that you table if the applicant isn't comfortable going forward, knowing that they have to have a unanimous 4 votes from the 4 people who are there. If they aren't comfortable with moving forward, there's no legal requirement that you table it to another meeting date where you can have 5. But I suggest to them that I think it's important just looking at, due process considerations, that kind of thing. People do have the right to petition their government. And I feel that if the applicant is not comfortable in moving forward with just 4 members, that we would give them the courtesy of continuing it to a meeting where we might have the full 5.
And we would not have to republish or do any of the processes that you originally had to do, or do we have to do that over again?
Well, if you have a regular meeting date and it's always on the 2nd Thursday, and you table it to the next regular meeting date, and you make that clear in the meeting for anybody who is here or anybody logging in online, then you should not have to republish.
I hear a however in the end of that though.
Well, sometimes people might say, I'm not going to be here on the 2nd Thursday of next month, so let's set up a special meeting. Given that we do want to provide a timely answer to this particular applicant. If that happens and you do want to set a special meeting, in an abundance of caution, I would send out your notices and republish again.
Can, please use your microphone.
Oh, give me that.
you don't, he's active like that.
We disadvantage
Cannot hear me?
for the recording.
On recording. Okay, thank you for the mic. How does an alternate get activated?
So the first thing what I do, or generally just out of just experience, I'll send out an email out there to see who would be available for that date of a meeting, and then look at my responses. And typically, if the primary members respond in there, then I'll set them. But if I don't hear from one of the primary members, I'm going to look now to my alternates and see who's available at that point. So there's nothing special you have to do in there. in there. So let's say, Christine and, is an alternate member. And I hear from 4 regular members. And Christine had also, submitted that she was available that day. I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of schedule her, because once I confirm 5, then I'll keep posted with those 5. Unless one of them all of a sudden had a late minute conflict, uh, in there. And to me, it's like whichever, we try to do a rotation, but it's whoever's available. A lot of the times I'm trying just to get 5 in there, because the schools, people got a lot of things going on. They're out of town, work, and all that. So
So then all 7 board members, 7 is the number, right?
there's total of 8.
8. So they are always involved in all the previous discussions.
There would be in one like this, but if this was a meeting tonight where we were reviewing a petition or an application, there would probably be 5 of you here. Only 5 members present because
5 full-time. There's 5 full-time, right?
5 full-time and 3 alternates.
But what I'm trying to get clear is that an alternate is a perfectly able and informed person to come and execute.
Mhm.
So that person needs to be involved in the case all throughout.
Yes, so if we had an appeal where, that it's presented that one night and for whatever reason, it's postponed, a decision is postponed to the next meeting date or set to another date, and then the expectation would be that those same people participate in the next appeal.
When you send notices out, do you send it to all the regular members and the alternates?
Yes. So yeah, the way I look at it, in the end of the day, I'm just looking for 5 members to be available, whether they're alternates.
When there's a vote,
Yes.
there's a vote. So what I wanted to just get clear is that you mentioned that there's reports that are prepared by the staff that we read ahead of time.
Yes.
So, that the voting member needs to come prepared. So if it's an alternate, that alternate needs to be prepared as well.
Yes. Yes, good point.
So this is done months ahead in advance or weeks.
Yes, yes. So, and typically the way it was set up in there, so our meetings are generally always held that second Thursday of the month in there when there is a request. Typically, the past 5 years, I think we meet like 2 or 3 times out of the year. So it's not very consistent in there, but and the reason we do the second meeting of the month or second Thursday of the month is that like council meets just about every other Tuesday. PCDC meets every other Thursday. The Parks Department has their own commission meeting, so and then court is held here every other Wednesday, so there's activity going on. So the zoning board, the date that was reserved for the zoning board is the second Thursday of each month. Okay, so if somebody wants a petition to go before the zoning board, in order for them to do that, I have to publish a hearing notice 15 days prior. So I'm already 2 weeks out. So you're going to know with at least 2 weeks prior that I'm going to have a meeting. Well, to do the posting for the newspaper, they want the posting submitted before their deadline, like a couple of days prior. So now I'm 3 weeks out. And then to review what somebody submitted, I need a week to kind of comfortably to take a look at it. So typically within a month in advance, I know if I'm going to have a meeting and I'm going to send out notifications to see who's available at that time.
Thank you.
All right. And again, after the board generally makes a decision that night, it's up to the board group to determine. So after you hear all the public comments, the staff, the petitioner, you do what you close your meeting and then you guys have a discussion.
Well, when Carlos says close the meeting, it doesn't mean that you go into the back room and you have discussions. Your discussions occur still in public. It's just that there's no chance for public comment or for any further testimony at that time.
You have a discussion for yourself. Generally, the chairman goes person by person and what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Then they talk a little bit about it. And then the chairman will ask, okay, is there anybody ready to make a motion? making the motion is simple because again, your motion is always going to be positive. That means to grant the appeal. And we're gonna have that written out for you in advance. So you're gonna read that and then you're gonna vote. So if you're not for the appeal, you're gonna vote no. If you're for the appeal, you're gonna vote yes. And again, I need 4 yeses for something to get, 4 yeses out of the 5 or 4 that are there to get something passed. All right? In there. Now, and that's where we're gonna go in, yes. So after that, so let's say you had I'll use it as an extreme example. You have an appeal that came before you. And the board granted it and you shouldn't have, and I'm gonna talk to the city and the city attorney saying, we really need to appeal this and there's some specific reason. We can then petition the county circuit court to reconsider what your decision was. In there. And it works vice versa. So somebody comes before you, asks for a variance, and you guys don't grant it. And again, I'm gonna say like, but you've granted everybody else's before. What, you know, I'm now gonna go to the county court and appeal your decision. And again, the judge is gonna look at what evidence was submitted. We're very thorough with ours, and it depends on what they submitted about that. So the hearsay about, well, you granted everybody else, you know, unless it's submitted as evidence, it's just hearsay.
Do you recall at any time of denying a variance? I'm just curious.
Denying, of
Oh,
course.
yeah, a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay. It's my first time up here.
yeah, a lot. Appeals? I
I don't think any
never won.
appeals.
It should be noted that nobody online or any recordings cannot hear what you're saying unless your microphone is on. Just putting that out there.
So I don't recall there's ever been an appeal of an appeal. It might have been before my time.
Yeah, there was one that I remember. That was, yeah.
And Carlos, just a question kind of, especially for the newer folks, just because something is phrased, the motion is phrased in the affirmative, doesn't reflect that staff or the people who created the motion believe that it should be approved. It's that the motions are always stated in the affirmative. And then kind of follow up to that is just because something is before the board doesn't mean that staff think it should be approved.
Correct. Good point.
It's the right.
That's right. It's the individual's right to come before the board. Another question that I have is when looking at things, and you know, I'm very new as well. Looking at just the most recent ones that came before, one of the questions I was having in my head as the petitioners were presenting their case was how much of what is presented is, how does this board consider what is presented as a want versus a need when trying to decide when a variance is acceptable? So this is, I'll just make up something that was not in the most recent one so that we're not like tied to a specific case. But let's say that somebody wants to build an extra addition to their house and they want it to be a certain size. And in making it that size, it's going over the setback by 3 feet or whatever. But they have the option to not make it that size. Let's say they want a 2-car garage, but they have the option to do a car and a half. But they don't want a car and a half. How do things like that factor into the decision making for the board and determining this practical difficulty when it's like it's not necessary but it's desired?
There's 2, and I'll call it, I'm gonna give a planner's version and then I'll let Stephanie give a legal version. So when we take a look at them in there could be some things that, yeah, there are other options. A lot of the times, let's say on pie-shaped lots or lots that are in a cul-de-sac, there, it's majority of the variances you'll see usually involve a pie-shaped lot. And there are different alternatives that they could have done. Let's say they used the garage example, so in a pie shape, if you move further back, then your setback gets wider, and you get more space. And you move further back, the more space you get, the further back, the more space you get. But if you're trying to align it with the front of the house or extend what's already there, you're going to have that conflict. So we take a look at it in terms of, we know what the code is and what the intent is, and that we have to follow to. But then we also take a look at it from a design perspective, and also to what extent is the request. Somebody's lot requires a 20-foot side yard setback, and to do this garage, because they're in a cul-de-sac, they need a 3-foot variance, but it's only for a corner part, because as the property goes back, the variance becomes the non-conformity kind of goes away. So it could have been, it's like, well, you could design it by having your existing garage here, but the second door here, and everything fits perfect. It can be done. A good architect, a good engineer can design it and make it look like perfect, but the typical homeowner isn't going to see that or really want to invest all the work into that. So we do that review, and we take a look at it, and we look at, okay, what is the degree of the variance request? How much are they asking? 3 feet, reasonable. 5 feet, you're getting like really out there. 10 feet, no way. There's look at other options. So we're going to go to the board and saying, hey, we looked at the other options, the other alternatives, and there we tried to minimize how much it was going to happen in there, and what was going to be the merit. What's the benefit back to the city by doing this? So like having 3 feet and making the house look consistent, or saying no and making them push something further back, and what impact that has with the rest of the structural components of the home and all that. And again, we try to work with them to tie that to the uniqueness of the property or so. It doesn't always work in there, but we do look at it from that end to see, what is, what would be in the best interest of the city. Let's say it's like, no, because if there's not that flexibility, the worst case scenario is then there's no more investment into that home or so, or it becomes another tear down. And we look at that, we take those into consideration. Not ideal, but I think we can't avoid having those looked at from a planner's perspective to see what would be in the best interest of the city. And this is not trying to go against like the council's goals and visions in terms of how the code was set. But there are those times that it does happen in there. Does it have to be granted? No. The board can make that decision. The other thing is sometimes the board won't agree with us, and that's okay. We don't take that personally. It just depends on, like the other person can have a legal representation, and they could be like way up, up in front and combative with all that. And then we kind of rely on ours, but they can be intimidating to the board or so. But it's ultimately their decision in the end. In there, we provide them as much guidance as we can, more from the perspective of what would, in the long run, what is the degree of nonconformity or variances that we would be making, and how far is compliance or the other option make it viable. And I don't know if that really answers like what you're saying, but I think there's always going to be that flexibility. We're just kind of human, and we're looking at it on a case-by-case basis on what that structure is in there. I think in the end, they're just more from a planning aspect of it. I think legally it's more black and white.
Well, it's supposed to be, but it's really not. It doesn't come down to be black and white in most cases. So I think the first thing you look at is, okay, so what are they trying to do? And let's face it, today's standards for, let's just take single family residential. Today's standards are a lot different than they were a few decades ago. It was perfectly fine a few decades ago to have 2 bedrooms and only 1 bathroom in the house. And a lot of houses, built a few decades ago, just have 1 bathroom. That's it. Today's standards is a little bit different. So let's say that somebody is wanting to add in a bathroom or add in a bedroom. Is what they're trying to do reasonable given today's standards? And if you answer that question that yes, what they're wanting to do is reasonable given today's standards, and they're not going beyond that. Let's say that they're not asking for 4,000 square foot house, or they're not asking for 5 bathrooms. They're only asking for maybe 2 or 3 and a setback in order to do a room addition. Then I think that's fine if you find that that's reasonable. Your next inquiry is going to be if what they're asking to do is reasonable given today's standards for construction, and for housing, have they considered other alternatives that would not result in a variance? So, for instance, if they're wanting to add on a bathroom, is there a way for them to add it on maybe to the rear where they don't have to intrude into the side yard? And that's where staff, I think, is going to inquire when they first come in to make the application. They're going to say, okay, well, what else have you considered? Have you considered this alternative? Have you considered this alternative? And that's very important. If they come in and they say, no, this is the way that we want it. And believe me, I've had those applications before. Then, if they haven't considered others and they can't provide a good explanation about why they haven't considered them, then at that point, I think it goes into more of a want than a need. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. In Creve Coeur, I had an application one time to their Board of Adjustment, and they had a house, and it was a reasonably sized house and with reasonable amenities. The only thing, and this was new construction, the only thing is that they wanted it laid out on the lot a certain way because one of the owners was a firm believer in feng shui, and she believed that this particular layout on the lot, which would intrude into the setback a little bit, was the best for her. And she couldn't, and she had many other alternatives. There were other ways to lay out this exact house on the lot without intruding into the setback. But no, this is the way that she wanted it, and that variance was denied. So I think if the overall project is reasonable, they're not asking for too much, given today's standards for housing, and that they've considered other alternatives, and they're able to provide a legitimate explanation. And I'll give you an example of that too. Recently, I had an application before the Brentwood Board of Adjustment, and this was for an industrial and property, and it was their mechanical equipment. And so they wanted to put the mechanical equipment on the ground in a setback. And so we went through, and they were able to articulate an explanation as to why the roof wouldn't work, why putting it inside wouldn't work, why putting it on the opposite side wouldn't work. And they had very legitimate explanations about why all these alternatives wouldn't work and why this one location was really the only location for this mechanical equipment. And so they were able to articulate that, and that variance was granted. So I hope that
is very
answer.
helpful. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
I think your question is a good one, though. And probably in the discussions we have, that's the biggest issue we would normally have is what's a want versus a need. And that's always, it can be a little dicey sometimes.
Versus hardship. So let me follow up on your example where you said move it to the back.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's say there's no plumbing in the back. Okay. The plumbing's up, the kitchen, basement and all that. And they're saying, well, no, you can move it here, but there's no plumbing. And the person says, well, that, as you said, that's not a good example because it would cost me this, and I would have to do this for plumbing to get the plumbing back there. Now, I'm gonna be brutally honest, some people here have known in the past I've said, don't come to me about money woes, okay? But this one is one where there's no plumbing and I would have to do all this. Is that what we would consider as part of that hardship?
Not of the hardship itself, but I think that, and I'll get to that in just a moment, but that it is, I think that you should consider it when you're weighing, have you considered other alternatives? And I think that that is a legitimate reason why that alternative in the back is not available to them or is not reasonably available to them. Now, remember, hardship or practical difficulties, you're really looking at the property itself. So, is there some, practical difficulty? Is the lot width just too small to do this bathroom addition? And then if it's just too small, or if it doesn't provide a lot of space, and they've shown you why, why the back won't work, then I think the size of the lot is your hardship or your practical difficulties, because maybe it was platted 30 years ago, who knows? And then, so you're saying, okay, so you really do need a second bathroom given today's standards. And you've considered the back, which would not intrude into the setback. And you've given a legitimate explanation about why that wouldn't work. There's no plumbing. You would have to run plumbing, which would be very difficult and costly. And you've considered all these other alternatives. And so you're really left with, this is the most reasonable alternative for you. Yeah.
All right. I'll go, I think that kind of covers it in terms of, for the slide presentation. There's one that was called about standards, and was the board's decision based on competent and substantial evidence. These are the standards if somebody was appealing this to the circuit court. Did the board make a decision that was competent, it had substantial evidence? Was the board's decision arbitrary, capricious, or unreasonable? And was the board's decision unlawful or in excess of the board's jurisdiction? And again, staff is here to make sure that those don't happen in that process, or we point them out to you if they were.
There's one additional topic that I would like to address, and that is witnesses. So you're going to have people come in and speak in favor of the variance, and then you're going to have some people maybe come in and speak in opposition to the variance. And you are not legally required to consider all of the testimony on the same level. So you can take into account, and you could say, well, the next door neighbor's testimony is a lot more important than, let's say, somebody who lived, 2 blocks over and who wasn't going to be seeing, let's say, the garage coming into the side yard setback. So you can consider the neighbor's testimony is more important. You can weigh that more heavily than somebody else. And I've got a board of adjustment, and we meet almost every single month. And there is somebody who loves to attend government meetings, and he comes in and he comments on every single variance application there is, even if he lives a mile away from it. And he's always in opposition. Should his testimony be considered in the same way that the neighboring property owner's testimony is considered? No, he lives a mile away. He's not going to be affected. So you are not required to give the same level of consideration to all the testimony. You consider where they're located, how they're going to be affected, how they're going to be aggrieved, and all of that.
I want to back up again for a second. I'm sorry
Mhm.
about the bathroom thing.
Okay.
Okay. You have a house, they have to have a second bathroom. They want to build out back, which they're able to, but it's costly because of plumbing. They need to go on the side where there is plumbing, but it's going to encroach. They're going to need a variance. Money shouldn't be a hardship. I mean, it's not a hardship. And if that's without a variance, if the bathroom has to be put in back and that costs more money, sorry, that's where it has to be, correct?
That's how it's supposed to be. That money is not a consideration. But I also think that at least boards of adjustment that I work with, I mean, they look at things practically too. And now if, let's say that it is a difference, putting it out back is maybe a cost difference of only maybe $5,000 or something like that. Then you will probably say, well, it's completely reasonable then to add in the plumbing and put it out back because the cost difference is minimal. But when you start talking about just for normal families, something maybe like cost difference of something like 25,000, something like that. You know, I do think that it can be considered when you're looking at whether alternatives are reasonable. That remember, that's not really the hardship. The hardship is you've got an old platted lot that maybe is smaller than, you know, what is normally found in the zoning district. And so that's, you know, and we're trying to work around all these practical difficulties. If someone came in and said, my lot is huge, and I don't have any problems and I don't have any creeks. I don't have, it's not a pie-shaped lot. It's perfectly square and it's huge, but I want to put it here because it's going to be cheaper for me, or I want this exterior facade because it's going to be cheaper for me. No, I don't think that that flies. But when you're looking at whether alternatives are reasonable, I think that you can consider if it's going to be an exorbitant cost difference.
Thanks.
When,
Another question. I have some questions. Is that okay now? Yeah. So you mentioned witnesses, and some are just, you know, regular citizens, but I guess it's perfectly admissible for someone that really wants their appeal to bring some type of expertise and speak on the behalf before the board.
Yeah.
And let's say the board really wants to deny this, or the staff is saying this is really, but they come really loaded.
Mhm.
Can the board request experts to, on their behalf, to explain expertise on their behalf, like architects and engineers?
Yeah, so, and actually, I think that staff will probably notice that in the beginning when the application is done. But the statute does allow the board, you know, or probably what's going to happen is that staff, because it's the city that presents the city's case, and that's why they give a staff report. Remember, you are like a judge. And so the city is going to present its evidence and its case, and then the applicant is going to present its evidence. I am sure that the staff is going to recognize if an independent expert is necessary for the city's case, and that they will bring in that person and to testify in order to make sure that the city puts on competent and substantial evidence to support, let's say, the denial of a variance. And so normally that's how it would be done, because remember, you're neutral. It does allow you, let's say that you want just to consult with somebody, the statute does allow, you know, for that. But if there was some type of evidence, specialty evidence needed, I'm sure that staff then would arrange for that and then bring that person in. As far as witnesses, if you have a couple of people who come in and you think, oh, you know what, their testimony is really not relevant to this, but if they do want to testify, then I would go ahead and allow them to testify.
Okay. So you mentioned the word independent
Mhm.
expert and that we're neutral. So how about those staff? And that's why my question, my original question was, can we bring in the city engineer, or do we have a city architect? I'm just asking, do we have those? Those are obviously not independent, but do we have a city engineer that can participate in proceedings, or a city
We
architect,
can,
or is it a consultant?
if an application indicated that there was, I'll use an example, a structural complexity that was part of their variance request, or their use for the hardship or practical difficulty in there. I guess beyond like my expertise, I could have an inspector, or I could have you know, public works director the note if there was a question regarding that. Let's say that the applicant decides to hire somebody to come in to speak in their behalf that's versed or knowledgeable beyond what we could, that we, staff would be able to question or rebuttal on behalf of the city or even the board, we could hire our own expert to come in and ask questions or engage into, is that right? Is that correct? Or
Okay,
so.
yeah. So does the city have a staff engineer, a
No.
licensed staff engineer?
No,
So no. What about an architect?
no.
Okay, thank you.
When, let's say that a petitioner is coming forward and is going to use a financial piece as some of their proof for their practical difficulties, is the expectation that they will present actual documentation that shows and proves the difference in cost? Or does the board just take them at their word?
I would look at it that there's that it's possible two scenarios in that. I think it would be, the board should question that, how did you get to that amount? And the more proper way is like to see an invoice in there. If you're gonna use that as an excuse, you should submit evidence. Again, it goes to some, an appeal of an appeal, they're gonna be looking at the evidence that was submitted. And it was because a neighbor sued the decision of the appeal, and that the basis of the appeal was because of the cost, but yet no cost estimate outside of a number that was thrown out during back and forth. What was we would be, I don't want to say liable, but I mean, Judge, where was the evidence regarding how did they get to that number? I think it's a reasonable question that the judge is gonna ask.
I think I would be asking for more evidence of that. It's gotta be competent and substantial. And if somebody, now if you have a property owner who has been in construction for 20 years and he says, based on my experience, it's going to be this, he's bringing a special expertise to his testimony. But if somebody just comes in and says, well, I haven't really checked around, but I Googled it and I think it's going to be, $50,000 more if I did this, and therefore this alternative is not available to me. I don't think that carries much weight, but that's my opinion. And so I would ask for more evidence of that.
And then my final question is, does the board have to make a decision that night?
No.
So if they feel that questions arise and they don't feel that they have evidence to clearly decide one way or the other, they have the option to table?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I would assume it could be that, I mean, after all the testimony, we're 3 hours in. And
Right.
okay, we need time to think it over or look over our information. So we're gonna.
Yeah, it has happened several times. But I think this board does a good job of knowing that, as far as asking the right questions, finding out if there are alternatives. And for everything we do, I think we will ask, have you looked at this? We don't just, we try not to grant any variance, truthfully. Sometimes they're pretty easy to decide. I mean, once we get all the information, we're not talking any, it's pretty obvious that it's Carlos, that they're supporting this decision, but it has to come in front of us. But we pretty much, we drill them as far as all other options not to create a variance all the time.
And I think in practical terms, just having been on the board for quite some time, if the case where, as you came up, where we just accept the word for it, if it was reasonable, maybe. But I think if it was outrageous, we would probably say, you must document that before we go any further.
Can we ask questions to anyone presenting ahead in front of us, whether it be staff or any witnesses or the
Absolutely.
petitioner?
As long as they're sworn in.
Wish, on that note, I'm gonna hold on one second because I think it's important for the board members to know this. So our agenda is gonna get posted the Friday before the meeting. And you're probably gonna get an email from me saying, I have an appeal. And a lot of the times, because we are a small community, I get asked like where and whom, in there, because they may be, associates in the PTO or something like that. I was like, I really don't want to get involved in that. And that's okay. That's why I have the total of the 8 members in there, because that does happen. So that means you're going to know where the variance is and possibly who the variance requester is. Okay. You as a board member can't go to that property, or can't go walk through that property, can't make contact to that property owner in there, nor can that applicant call you and say, hey, I'm going to be going to the board because we are doing this and all that. All you can consider is what is submitted and brought to you on that night, or any subsequent night after that meeting that is presented to you. So if I'm saying that my hardship is, I'm just going to use a historic tree on the grounds in there. And that's what, you're going to see the application a week before the meeting and what their hardship is. And they're using that, yeah, you can go kind of drive by and just turn around and see what the tree looks like. But you shouldn't go out there to go look and touch the tree, or talk to the owner about the tree, or, engage in your own aspect of the tree. You're going to wait to that meeting. And if I'm saying it's a historic tree, if I'm going to tell you that, my assumption is your expectation is you're going to ask me, how do I know that? Did you prove it? Show me the Missouri way, of why that has, how I got to the age, or why it has some historic significance or something. I should be just providing you the proof of what I'm telling you is specific in there. If by chance, and again, we're a small community, that they do talk to you, and you happen to be the fifth person that I get a hold of, because I can't, you have to disclose that information at the meeting, that, hey, I did get a call from them. They inquired about the appeal process, but I didn't answer any questions. I just want to put it out for the record. Or they're associate of mine, or and something, and we talked, but we didn't talk about the appeal process. Make sure you make us aware of that. And again, you should not have to go to a property. You'll get information of what they're saying is their appeal, like the cost. And your response should be, well, where is the invoice? Where are the numbers broken down in there? And if they're not in the packet and they didn't provide it, they just do like, hey, it's going to be costly. You should grill them at that meeting, because odds are we already did and told them that they need more information. I can't force them to get it in there, but I can make them aware that they're taking that risk.
What if they bring it that night, Carlos? I mean, we've all seen this before. But
Yeah,
what if they
that-
bring it that night?
Yeah.
It's not part of the packet. It's new evidence and it's accepted?
Mhm.
Okay.
Anything presented to you at the hearing, even if it hadn't been presented to staff beforehand, can still be considered, because that's evidence presented to you during your deliberative process.
The one thing I will note, and unlike that aspect of it, is I can't come with, I have a whole new design, but
Yeah.
that would be different. A couple of just some notes in here.
Real quick, I actually have a meeting at 8:30.
All right. I know you, so you're good. We do have to do election of officers. I am short 2 people in there, but eventually I do have to get that done. So I might look at another meeting in December, unless you guys want to, it's 8:30. So yeah. So we'll have to do it on another night, but if we can continue the discussion. Thanks, Brian, for stopping in.
I have a question. Maybe you discussed it before I came. Apologies for being late. But who evaluates conflict of interest? Is it a self-honors system,
Yeah,
I
it's a
think.
hard
Did you
thing.
talk
So
about that already, or?
Conflict of interest, I would assume is like if you have a financial interest in that deal. If they're a neighbor, I probably wouldn't participate. If they're down the cul-de-sac, I think you're okay as long as you disclose it. And there, if your kids go to, the same school or in the same Boy Scout, Girl Scout or church club, that's not a financial interest. You know the person, but you don't have a financial interest in that person. So, because sometimes, I mean, we're 8,700 and you can't imagine how small that is when I'm trying to get a meeting, because everybody pretty much knows everybody.
Yeah, and I kind of understand. I just wondering if there is an actual cycle process that you have to say, I have no conflict on this case. I will serve as a
No,
board. There's no process.
unless you tell me when, again, that's where a lot of people, like when I send that email saying, I got a variance,
Yeah.
several members will ask, well, where is it and whom?
Yeah. Well, in the neighborhood here, there's an incredible amount of families.
Yeah.
I start talking to them and they're all
And we're
cousins,
such a
sold a
small,
house
well-knit
here.
community that
And
happens.
family relationship, it is a conflict, but it's mute if it's not discussed or part of the process.
And I would think of all the boards and commissions that the city has, I mean, because of the size of the community, how close knit it is, this one is the most difficult because odds are you're like one person away from knowing that applicant.
Can I ask my staff question?
No, yeah.
Okay, so I just have a few questions, just how the Board of Adjustment works. In terms of the meetings that, Chair Gerstein said that, like you've had those meetings that have not been, or action hasn't been taken on the time that it's been presented. So is there a timeline that kicks in to say that there's a certain amount of days that this has to appear again at the Board of Adjustment, or is it just automatically the next month we plan on bringing them back? Because I know like with PCDC, you have 60 days, to take action on this petition. So if it comes for the board here, is there some sort of,
Shot clock?
yeah, or does it kind of just carry over to the next month for us for when we would have our next meeting?
Yeah, so, there is no time deadline to entertain a petition. However, just under, just very broad due process principles, it's important to do it on a timely basis, don't drag them out. So if a petition comes to you and you don't act on it on the first meeting, you can table it and consider it later. There's no time deadline for you to take final action. I just wouldn't let it go on for too long. That's just not fair to the applicant. Now, like planning decisions and things like that, if they do get dragged out and it was clear that it's an and you guys will never do administrative actions, but on certain administrative actions like plan commission, if you do delay it too long, that can actually incur some damages to the applicant. And if you should have approved it in the first place, let's say for a site plan, and it complied with all aspects of your ordinance, and staff is saying it complies with all aspects of your ordinance, and the plan commission, though, just doesn't like it, and they delay it, and then let's say that it goes up to the city council and then it's delayed a little bit more. There have been cases actually where the applicant has brought a lawsuit against the city and has obtained damages for that. Now, you guys are quasi judicial, you guys don't fall under that. But I think just under general due process considerations, I think it's important that you consider it and make final action on a timely basis. Just don't drag it out for too long.
And then are there any timelines on how long a witness can present for?
You can definitely set them.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you have rules of procedure that you've done for the Board of Adjustment here, but some of my boards of adjustments have set rules of procedure. So it's usually either staff or the applicant that goes first. And if it's the applicant, then they have a certain period of time. And then staff gives their report. And then you take the any testimony from people in the audience. And I know a lot of boards of adjustment that have set time limitations so that it doesn't go on for too long. Yeah. But you need to apply those equally across the
Yep.
board, except Usually they offer the applicant additional minutes because, and the rationale is because they are the ones with the petition. And any questioning by the board does not count against that person's time. So let's say that the next door neighbor comes up and says, and gives, let's say that the limit is 5 minutes. And they give 45 seconds, and then all of a sudden people start asking the next door neighbor questions, then that doesn't count against their 5 minutes. Usually.
And then I had one more thing about, so in my time here, I've been here a little over 2 years now, and I've been to a couple Board of Adjustment meetings. And in terms of Board of Adjustment, I've never been in the situation where the board has put conditions onto a certain petition coming here. And I know that when it goes to the board, then it has to go to the planning commission. So my question is, I know that, I mean, obviously the conditions will carry weight, but at what time, you know, the PCDC board also applies their own conditions as well. So I was
Yes.
curious on like, are we from planning staff held to enforce the zoning board of adjustments commissions prior to even that petition going to the Planning and Community
Yeah.
Design Commission?
Because what they're doing is they are approving a variance subject to these conditions.
Mhm.
And if those conditions are not met,
Mhm.
then the variance is null and void.
Okay.
So if you take, let's say that they get a variance, you know, for a fence, and they say, we're gonna put a condition on it that, yes, you can have a privacy fence at 6 feet when it would normally be 4 feet, but the slats have to be 30% open. So it has to be some openness, you know, for light and air considerations. So if it goes to Plan Commission can't say, okay, we're going to allow something at 20% open. Because then that would negate the condition, and then that would mean that the variance is null and void.
So like, for instance, when you gave an example earlier about talking about the board pushing for like screening of, you know, if you're gonna go over the side yard setback, then they can apply the condition of screening. But then I'm curious, like also in terms of like with our zoning now with the whole new tree ordinance that we've
Mhm.
adopted. And I know that we're, you know, obviously putting trees in is different than putting in shrubs or, you know, arborvitae or whatever. But I'm just curious, like, since they're not really, or would that then zoning code and that tree ordinance then apply to those conditions that they would be applying to their Board of Adjustment petition?
Yes, so let's say that they apply a condition, and their conditions are only relating to any bad effects that are caused by the variance.
Variance, okay.
So let's say that they say, we just want some small landscaping bushes
Mhm.
along this garage wall, and that's the only thing that they say. But when you go back to Plan Commission, there might be other requirements that are above and beyond that, and that plan is subject to those.
Okay, understood.
Yeah.
Sweet, thank you.
A couple of just other points just to note out, in there within our zoning code, like, I'll use the ideal lot is typically 100 feet. And the setbacks for that lot are based on a percentage. It's 12% of the lot width. So in an ideal lot, you'll have 100-foot width, and you'll have side yard setbacks that are 12 feet and 12 feet on each side. That's the ideal lot. We have lots in our zoning district that are 300 feet wide. And we have to apply the same percentage, 12% of 300, 12% of 300. So all of a sudden, this lot is being imposed a 36-foot side yard setbacks. And that comes before the board every once in a while. Is that a practical difficulty? You know, the ordinance was set based on proportions. You know, the house was not centered, it was built on one side, and all of a sudden, because we're in proportions, you know, because you have a wider lot, you're now, I don't want to use, well, lack of a better word, you're being penalized for having a wider lot, and is that fair in there? Because that probably wasn't the spirit and intent of the code. It's always easy to say or make that assumption, but it is solely an assumption. And that might be a practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship, but due to those percentages, is that really reasonably fair to that property owner, where the neighbor can be 12 feet from their property line, but they got to be 36 feet from the neighbor's property line? the character comes into play, the neighborhood comes into play, but sometimes those happen. And sometimes it's a uniqueness that a street does a curvature. And so it's not really a corner lot, but it's got, you know, instead of it being a pie shape, it's the reverse pie shape. And therefore it has a lot of frontage, and that 12 feet, you know, it gets tight as you start getting into the back. There are other cases in terms of this setback where in the way it was drafted and presented to the council, council has adopted these, but they didn't write these. I'll note that. So you know, like each lot has to provide a setback of 12% of the lot width, but in no case shall any lot, any setback be less than 5 feet. So anybody that comes to petition to me where their house is 6 feet from the property line and they want to add on to the garage and they're gonna be within 5 feet, or they need to go over, it's like, no, I mean, the council has made a determination, or based on what was adopted by the council. And in no case, anywhere in all of it, should a structure be less than 5 feet from the property line. And there's no other ifs, ands, or buts in there. Now, there may be some occasion where that might happen, but then, it's noted that applicable everywhere that no, it should never be less than 5 feet. The other thing in the rear yard setback for the buildable area, it should never be less than 20 feet. So no, you should, as a property owner, a residential property owner, you should never have a structure that is less than, a home structure less than 20 feet from your rear yard in there. And again, there are some times where we have lots that are really deep. So where one yard next to it could be, they only have a 20-foot setback, but the yard behind it or in the side of it was too deep, and they had to provide 40 or 60 feet in there. But those are the things that you kind of take into consideration when we're dealing with proportions. But we always point out to you that there's an absolute minimum. Like, no case should it ever be this much, or it should ever be that much. Also understand that when you grant the variance, the way it's kind of set up, if you grant somebody a side yard setback variance, like they're required to have a 12-foot variance and you grant the 10-foot variance, we will craft the motion carefully, because that variance would then apply to the full length of the property line in there. So it's not like you're granting a variance just for this segment. You're granting a variance for a whole side yard or rear yard, the full length and extent of it. So when we craft your motion, we're going to say it's specifically to this set of plans that appeared before the board on this date in there, because the goal here is like, okay, so now they did a garage addition. It was going to be 20 feet deep, and that's all that was going to be, and 10 feet from the property or from the setback. But all of a sudden they want to add another 20 feet behind that. Well, I've gotten my side yard setback, so I can continue on in there. We try to craft the motion to avoid that, but once you grant the variance and it runs with the property and for the structure for life, I would assume when they tear down that property, we're back to the regular code in there. So the other thing, it runs for perpetuity, means it runs for the life of the property or the structure that was granted the variance. The other thing that I'll caution, we talked about landscaping or things like that. Be cognizant from a staff perspective. So if you granted a variance and a condition was placed, well, you're going to have to plant, evergreen plants along the side of that. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, whoever the staff is, and if people recall, or the trees die or something like that, you put us in a position where we're following up on an individual property for things that are, conditions that are hard to follow up. Somebody's got to look up the record, or somebody finds, in there. So just be cognizant about it. And then there's another thing that we call variations. When the council adopted the code, and again, this is written for the council, and there are certain things that they excluded. They provided a variance process, but excluded it from the zoning board of appeals. And by doing so, it doesn't have to meet that high bar threshold that you have to. So one is like fences. Fences, if somebody wants a variance for a fence, it goes to the plan commission. By going to the plan commission, it just becomes an aesthetic decision in there, where it's not a hardship type of decision in there. And that's why you generally won't see fences in there, because the way the code is crafted is that it becomes more of, what character and value does it bring to the neighborhood, as opposed to whether there's a hardship involved or not. Now, the council can always change it and bring it back to the commission or to the board, and all of a sudden it becomes a hardship issue. And it would be difficult to get a hardship on a fence in there, or what, to justify that you couldn't comply to it. So those were just a couple of things I wanted to note in terms of the discussions. Anything else? Done? Anything? That's all I have, I think.
Thank you. And we haven't been here for a lot. There's not a lot of meetings, because it shows how great of a job you guys do, seriously, because before we were here, I mean, every month. And it's obvious that you guys are on top of it because we're not here.
Zoning changes,
Right, yeah. So it's, you guys are doing an unbelievable job.
Will you be sending us the presentation, the PowerPoint?
Sure, we'll get that out. No problem. And then we do have written procedures. I'll send those out. I should have printed those out today for you. So every time when we have the meeting, we have the step-in-step instructions. So regardless of who is operating or running that meeting that night, they have like all the steps, and then all the attachments and things of those. We'll get that out along with a list of the members. Now, the one thing I note now on the website, we do have to identify who the board members are. Outside of that, I don't give them any other information of where locations, numbers, emails, in that. If somebody wants to get something to Ted, they have to go through staff to get that to Ted. We just can't go and approach them or call them or email them or in there. So. All right.
I had a question. Again, I missed the introductions. So was the full board attending today?
No,
Gentlemen here.
short, two gentlemen, David and Brian didn't come in.
I thought he was Brian.
No, Adrian didn't come in.
Adrian.
Come in, Brian.
Brian was here, yeah. Okay, and Christina. Okay.
When's the next?
Right now, we don't have any appeals anticipated. We were in discussions with somebody in there, and I think they finally got it in their head that it's not going to work, and they're not going to submit for their request.
We need to vote on we do that. We need to do that today, or should we do?
It would be.
Sorry about that. I thought I did. I just hear my voice in my head. Or should we do that the next meeting?
You said we're meeting.
Of the 5 principal members, no offense on the alternatives, but I got 4 of them present. I'm just missing Mr. Zobel.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so I think you guys are pretty well set.
So we should vote for a chairman.
You can go ahead and consider.
All right.
All right, you guys want me out of here?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't care.
I move for Larry to continue as chair.
I'll second that. I will vote for Mr. Ted Cicero to be the vice chair of the Zoning Board of Adjustments.
Second.
Secretary, which I think.
Secretary. Missy, yeah, you'd be
I
great.
see you're,
I second.
I'm nominated.
All right, who motion for?
Can you say
Missy.
what does the secretary do?
I was gonna.
Less-
We don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Way back when, they actually put the minutes together, and then the city got staff. We still kept the secretary, because before we were recording or doing it the way we do now, we would verify like motions. Like, did you get the same, did
Okay.
your motions match my motions when I wrote down my notes?
Okay,
Now
You
that
would read
everything's
the
pre-recorded,
roll.
read the roll
Okay.
and
they
call the
read
meeting.
roll,
Okay.
yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So. And it's always unique for a 5-member board to have that, and I think I had the same thing with the EDC, so like, the majority of them have officer titles.
I get that for all these other boards, but this is a semi-quasi board and we are required to record and have notes on this, is my understanding.
So that-
Because if there's the need to go to court.
You have to have a transcript if you go, yeah, because.
Didn't we used to have a lady that came here and sat in
did,
here
yeah.
and transcribed, hearing somebody or something?
Mhm.
Yeah. okay.
I know. You see.
Yeah, a second.
Okay, so I have, well, and here's where it gets complex. So anytime we have a motion and a second, there should be a vote, and all our votes have to be roll call votes. So on the first motion, Mr. Luna, motion to, for Mr. Gerstein to continue as chairman. That was seconded by Ms. Waldman. So on that motion, I'm gonna call out, whether Ms. Hanson,
Yes.
okay. Ms. Waldman,
Yes,
Mr. Luna,
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, on this. Oh, I thought he had to, Mr. Gerstein, sorry.
Oh, but if I say no, no, yes, fine. Yes.
All right. On the vice chairman, so Ms. Waldman made a motion for Mr. Cicero to serve as vice chairman. It was seconded by Mr. Luna. So on that motion, Ms. Hanson,
Yes.
Ms. Waldman,
yes.
Mr. Luna,
Yes.
Mr. Cicero,
Yes.
Mr. Gerstein.
Yes.
That motion passes 5-0. Now, Mr. Cicero made a motion to have Missy Waldman serve as secretary. That was seconded by Mr. Gerstein. So on this motion, Ms. Hanson,
Yes.
Ms. Waldman,
Sure.
Mr. Luna,
Yes.
Mr. Cicero,
Yes.
Mr. Gerstein,
Yes.
and that motion passes 5-0. So thank you guys for serving as officers. And there, we'll get that updated. And then again, any other questions and all that?
I have another question, not necessarily very formal, but I have been looking at the zoning on my iPad and which is very nice. But is there an actual published paper one that I can borrow? Or
Yeah,
no?
this,
No, if you're gonna print it, I don't want it. I just thought maybe they have them available here, but if they're not, that's okay. No, I don't need a printed one. And I got a participant sustainability actions, which is burn my eyes on the screens.
So in your email saying we have an appeal, you will not give us the address. We have to ask you for it. Is
most of
that
the time
correct?
it's asked, so now I go ahead and put where it is, who's
Okay.
making the appeal and what the appeal is.
Okay,
I won't give you my opinion or anything like that in
Yeah, yeah.
advance, but, and then as the paperwork comes in, then we'll get those out to you, so.
Meeting adjourned. Is that all right?
All right.
I
Beautiful.
was just curious.
See, I got in there.
That we do the notifications to every address within 300 feet.
Mhm.
But is it smart, like should we just send them to our Board of Adjustment too with the public notice? Like, should we send it to the board member's house too, so that they know that?
That's a good point.
I'm just curious, and then, I guess when we get a petition, we can.
In advance.
Yeah,